all the parties concerned should refrain from doing anything that will exacerbate the already poisoned atmosphere, the tension, or even the conflict. Now, why the Chinese government said all the parties concerned? Because the Chinese are not very happy, not only about North Korea, but also about other parties involved. So now we seem now to come to a point again, there seems to be a very slight ray of hope ahead that North Korea wants to get a contact with the United States or even with South Korea. And there is a hope that there might be a kind of reviving efforts for the multilateral negotiations, for the peaceful solution of this nuclear issue. I just put this on the table, and I just want to emphasize we need a new vision for the cooperation. I think that's more important than anything else. And finally, I just want to emphasize again a point that raised by my distinguished Japanese participant. He talked about China, Taiwan, and because he is a former ambassador to China, I'm surprised that he used this kind of terms very loosely. If a person who used China, Taiwan, I say, for two independent identity, I wouldn't care because they are not serious researchers or they are quite ignorant of the political situation in this region. But he is not. He's a former ambassador to China, and he should know that Taiwan is a part of China. And therefore, to talk Taiwan and China as if two independent political entities is a gross mistake that my country would not accept. I thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a very interesting debate going on. Later on, I hope the Ambassador Tan Yin and General Pan can engage in more candid exchange opinions. Now, Ambassador O will have a hard time in how to balance between the right and left. Okay, Ambassador O.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To avoid my role of balancing, I like to point out that this room has a very strange setting. It is very dark in here, and a strong floodlight is coming from the other wall. I think this theatrical setting probably fits our charismatic chairperson, Professor Moon, but it's very difficult to read my text. Anyway, does not mean that I will not read my text. The security environment in East Asia is currently characterized by uncertainty and complexity with the existence of both traditional and non-traditional security threats. When we are not sure about how to describe the status of a certain thing, in my opinion, the safest bet is to say that it is uncertain and complex, and there are different factors working together, so, which I did. The need for multilateral security dialogue, however, in this region has long been recognized. Regional cooperation in East Asia has advanced very slowly compared to other regions of the world. Efforts to promote regional cooperation in East Asia have taken place mostly in and around the ASEAN, which gave birth to the ASEAN Plus 3 in 1997 and East Asia Summit in 2005. Probably it is too early to talk about regional cooperation a la Europe here. However, the great deal of common ground gained so far will help achieve real progress in a community building process. East Asian countries, like European countries, share deep cultural roots coming from an Asian civilization. which is instrumental in enhancing mutual tolerance and understanding. Moreover, the new economic dynamism and growing interdependence in the region will also create an atmosphere conducive to community building. The level of cooperation in the economic and social and political areas in East Asia has been going up steadily, if not dramatically. However, security cooperation in the region has reached only a preliminary level, remaining largely in the domain of academic debate and diplomatic rhetoric. Factors often cited as hindering regional security cooperation include historical and territorial issues, insufficient experience of regional cooperation, and the Korean Peninsula issue, and the cross-strait issues. I didn't say China-Taiwan, cross-strait issues. Finding resolutions to the diverse security problems in the region will be a lengthy process requiring concerted efforts. The ARF and other multilateral security entities such as CISCP and the NEACD provide valuable fora for discussions on security matters. But the reality is that these institutions are still at a developing stage. As such, the concept of multilateral security cooperation is yet to be fully materialized in this part of the world. However, there seems to exist a growing consensus on the need for regional security cooperation. Under these circumstances, different approaches can be considered to promote security dialogue and cooperation in East Asia. I would like to touch upon three of them. First, the six-party talks mechanism can serve as a catalyst for future security cooperation. As we know, the joint statement of February 2007 in the six-party talks created a working group on a Northeast Asia peace and security mechanism. The six-party talks, in the first process of a meeting in Northeast Asia, the six-party talks is the first process of meetings in Northeast Asia that engages in discussions on the most pressing and real security issues with participation of all major powers in the region. It also has the advantage of including North Korea, which renders the mechanism more comprehensive. However, there is an inherent weak point that may become an obstacle to the six-party talks, because this process is inevitably linked to the resolution of the North Korean nuclear issue when there is a deadlock in the North Korean nuclear issue, as we have now. Institutionalization of the six-party talks as a security cooperation mechanism should have to remain as a long-term goal. Second, we can develop existing security cooperation mechanisms in the region, such as the ARF, into a more durable framework. This idea has been tossed around, and when the six-party talks were going well, at least until 2007, a lot of debate has taken place on how to sort of institutionalize mechanisms like ARF. Utilizing the ARF would be a time-effective approach, since it already has in place the agenda, infrastructure, know-how, and experience as a regional security dialogue. However, as the ARF is basically an ASEAN concept, and therefore the structure and style are based on the, I quote, ASEAN way, unquote, the forum might not be relevant enough in addressing the pressing and real security issues in Northeast Asia. I think one good example of this problem might have been found in the recent chair statement of ARF that was adopted in Bangkok last month. In the statement, I don't know if you have noticed them, in the statement there are two paragraphs on the Korean Peninsula, and one of them was saying that several countries, for example, several countries condemned North Korea in its nuclear and missile test, and these countries emphasize the importance of implementing UN Security Council resolution, and they also talked about the importance of the six-party talks. But the second paragraph of this chair statement was saying that the DPRK totally rejected the UN Security Council resolution, and the DPRK also said that the six-party talks have already come to an end, and so on. So by doing so, I think the statement was trying to be faithful to the traditional ASEAN way of handling controversial issues by taking a balance between different views and by giving spaces to both views. But I think in this case, this is not Korean government official view. This is my, of course, personal observation. But this time, I think it went too far, because in the case of North Korean nuclear issue and nuclear test and missile test, we already have a few Security Council resolutions that have defined those acts as violation of the existing Security Council resolution, and that were introducing new sanctions. So when it comes to an issue where the UN Security Council has already taken an action on, I don't know how wise it is to give equal spaces to both views when one of the views was rejecting the Security Council resolution. And as you know, all UN members, when they joined the United Nations, they promised that they would abide by any decision by the Security Council. So that was, I'm not criticizing the ASEAN way of striking a balance and trying to be impartial to all the players. That has been a good tradition, and we respect that. But you know, if we put too much emphasis on that, then when it comes to dealing with real hardcore security issues like the North Korean nuclear and missile issues, that might not be a proper way of doing that. And then third, we can draw some key elements of the successful development of the Helsinki process and try to transplant them in East Asia. Well, this idea has been around for quite a while, and a lot of people talked about how we can copy OSCE or CSC in this part of the world. The Helsinki process was developed on the basis, among others, of the concept of diffuse reciprocity. In other words, the member states of the CSCE have taken their cooperative actions in the confidence that they would be paid in the long run as compared to seeking immediate benefits. This basic idea can be repeated, I think, in this part of the world. East Asia needs to pursue confidence building that will bring them gradual but effective change in the regional security environment. One way for East Asian countries to enhance mutual understanding in the security area might be focusing on non-traditional security issues. lessons they can learn from dealing with issues such as climate change, pandemic disease, or organized crimes can be coupled with political and diplomatic efforts so that an atmosphere conducive to multilateral security cooperation is created in the region. This approach of this idea of transplanting Helsinki process in East Asia, this doesn't necessarily have to stand alone. I mean, it can complement the other two approach, the other two meaning expanding the six-party talks or building on the ARF. So this might not be a standalone approach. Multilateral regional security dialogues devoted to discussions on peace and security in East Asia, such as the Jeju peace process here, can play an important role in advancing any of these approaches. Since its initiation in 2007 at the 4th Jeju Peace Forum, the Jeju process has stimulated discussions on ways to develop security cooperation in the region, as the Jeju process aims to develop a series of steps towards a regional security cooperation mechanism. The Korean government is ready to contribute to the process. We are devoting our efforts not only to solve pending security issues on and around the Korean Peninsula, but also to build a stable security environment through multilateral security cooperation in this part of the world. I do hope that the discussions we have here on Jeju will eventually bear fruit in achieving multilateral security cooperation in East Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter? But Timo will wrap up in the big frame of the Helsinki process.
I thought we were going oscillate. I'd like to thank Thank you, Chung, and I'd like to thank you for your kind invitation to be here today. And in my 5 minutes, I'm going to cover American nuclear hegemony, the North Korea issue, multilateral cooperation, and a Korea-specific implementation of Obama's nuclear abolition agenda. So let me begin by simply asserting something that in the paper, which I'm sure will be available on the website or however it's distributed, and it's in a draft form, outlines in some depth, which is that nuclear weapons in this region have played a very important role in the way that international relations or interstate security relations have been constituted since the end of World War II. Quite different in many respects to the role that they played in other parts of the world. I call the particular way that this was developed in the East Asia region American nuclear hegemony, a combination of a legitimating ideology articulated by the United States to justify its leadership and the role that the nuclear weapons played, with the institutional integration in the formal alliances between the United States and Japan, the United States and South Korea, the United States and the other allies in the region, 5 of them, and undergirded by the unique American nuclear weapons or forces or capabilities. I call this hegemonic, not in the common or conventional sense of political science, which is hegemonic because of the distribution of forces, but hegemonic in the Gramscian sense of the term, that there was a consensual basis to the leadership that the United States exercised, and that essentially the Allied leaders, the security elites of these countries, bought into the concept. So there is a consensus that was essential in American nuclear hegemony, and that one of the most critical aspects of the role that nuclear weapons played, apart from strategic deterrence in the central balance of terror between the United States and the former Soviet Union, initially in a Soviet bloc with China, then after about 1963-64, where those targets were separated in the American nuclear weapons planning, targeting apparatus, the way that this evolved was most critical aspect was the commitment and guarantee that the United States delivered to its allies that there would be no nuclear proliferation by either an ally or by an adversary of an ally. And this was a very important guarantee that was enshrined in the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968. And the essence of the North Korea problem is that North Korea has broken out of that system. It was never really part of it. It has challenged this central aspect of American nuclear hegemony in a very direct fashion, both with respect to the NPT system itself and it has completely rejected, if you like, the basis on which the United States has exercised this kind of power and has shown the United States to be relatively powerless to deal with a very small state that has used nuclear weapons to push nuclear threat right back up the nuclear barrel with its own compellence strategy. This system, as I see it, is unraveling rather quickly in this region, and American leadership is much more tenuous at this point. And what I find actually quite alarming at this stage is that the United States is actually attempting to reassert its leadership by reinforcing, restating, re-emphasizing extended nuclear deterrence in the alliance relationships in response to North Korea. I suggest this is highly counterproductive, not least because it will accelerate the North Korean nuclear weapons program itself, but also because this kind of threat will not actually reverse the proliferation trend by North Korea, and so it does nothing to actually change the basic problem for the old exercise of power using nuclear weapons in the alliance relationships to manage this region from an American perspective. I also believe that this will certainly bring states in the region that have relied psychologically on extended deterrence from the United States to reconsider their own long-run options as to whether they should seek independent nuclear weapons forces, and this effect is highly visible in the kind of public debates that are now underway in Japan, in Korea, even as far afield as Australia, where there have been a number of discussions about reviewing Australia's nuclear weapons options, partly as a result of the failure to contain the North Korean threat. Finally, at a very practical level, the North Koreans have said rather explicitly that unless extended nuclear deterrence, the nuclear umbrella, is withdrawn from South Korea and Japan, there's no deal possible over their nuclear weapons program. And I believe them. I think this is true. If I was in their shoes, I'd probably take the same position. So it's worth thinking in a very serious fashion about whether one could meet the North Koreans on this ground as part of a comprehensive deal to settle the problems between the United States and North Korea over the nuclear issue. The North Koreans collided mid-air with President Obama's nuclear abolition speech in Prague when they fired their missile that night on April the 5th. And it was very clear that President Obama was not prepared to deal with North Korea at that point. He was emotional in his response. He made statements that promised to deliver punishment to North Korea that he could not guarantee could be delivered. I think it was fairly transparent both to the North Koreans and to the allies and partners in this region that Obama had not thought through how his nuclear abolition strategy could in fact reverse the tide, could in fact turn around the North Korean nuclear threat. Yet this is the new overarching and global framework for the exercise of American hegemony. It's a future without nuclear weapons, according to President Obama and his most senior advisors. Yet there has been no clear articulation to the allies in this region as to what this means in practical and operational terms over the coming decades. And indeed, Japan is conducting at the moment a kind of rearguard push to ensure that the United States does not revise its nuclear weapons policy to state that nuclear weapons are only for deterrence of other nuclear weapons, the use of other nuclear weapons. In other words, would not be used against conventional threats, in effect adopting a no first use policy. This is an issue right now in the Nuclear Posture Review in Washington that will be resolved roughly over the next month. So this is a very current political issue that doesn't just relate to North Korea. I will conclude, because I've just about run out of time, by saying that I think it is important for this region, and I think probably the logical candidate for starting a really intense reflection and mutual exploration of this issue in this region is right here in South Korea, a state that threatens no one, yet faces a nuclear threat on its own border. I think it is timely to have a really intense and serious dialogue and discussion about the implications, the full implications of the nuclear abolition global framework for reconstituting the alliance relationships without reliance on nuclear threat. And that this, in fact, leads you directly to the issues of cooperative security relationships and common cooperative strategies for global problem solving in this region that would not be based on the projection of nuclear threat, an exterminist threat, which is part of what makes this region an anti-region. The core, probably, of an abolition agenda would be a Korean nuclear weapon-free zone, to which the nuclear weapons states in this region would sign protocols saying that they would not fire nuclear weapons in or out of Korea. And the likely consistent position for a country like Korea, a small non-nuclear weapons state, but in fact for any member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in good standing with the NPT and the IAEA, is rather than relying on alliance-provided deterrence, that all these states should be relying on the P5 guarantee or statement in 1995 and reiterated in other fora after 1995, that the nuclear weapon states will come to the aid of any non-nuclear weapon state that is threatened with nuclear aggression. That should be the basis on which one sleeps well at night facing a nuclear threat. And then finally, I would simply devalue, if I was in charge of anything, which I'm not, so I can make this statement and put it out there. If I was in charge of negotiating with North Korea right now, I would simply declare outright, unambiguously, that the United States and its senior ally in the peninsula, South Korea, and its other partners and allies in Korea will never, ever use nuclear weapons to respond to North Korean nuclear aggression. We do not need nuclear weapons to do that. If the North Koreans were ever to use nuclear weapons against South Korea or Japan or the United States or Australia or any other country in the world, they would be held to account. But we do not need nuclear weapons to do that, and to threaten to do that at this point is highly counterproductive and undermines both the prospect for nuclear abolition at a global level and does a disservice to Koreans themselves. If you think through these issues in depth, I think you come to that position. But no one in Washington at this point will say that. I'll end.
Thank you. Timo?
Can I have yeah. Thanks, Chung-In, and for the invitation to be here. As a Finnish person, I'm supposed to be. We Finns are very, very obedient people, And if you look at the topic of my paper, it's precisely the topic that I have been asked to which is the topic of this panel. Let's see if I can be as obedient about the time limit. What I've done is I have obeyed to look at Jeju process and how it affects the multilateral the success of multilateral security cooperation. Even though basically it's an impossible task, there are millions of intervening variables that affect. So what I have done is instead of looking at specifically Jeju process, I have looked at what this kind of process is and how that kind of project addresses the concerns, security concerns that we have in East Asia. So I first look at what Jeju process represents. Then I look at, in general, whether East Asian security is in East Asian hands, or does it just reflect the changes in the global power structures. And after that, I'll look at what the security is built on, and whether the type of activity that Jeju process represents affects that kind of security in a positive manner. It seems to me that essentially Jeju process is about bridging various tracks of peace diplomacy. It's about unofficial security dialogue between officials and experts, all appearing in their private capacities. So it clearly is a second track, but at the same time it assists moving to the first track. Now then, when I look at whether East Asia's own efforts can really determine what happens in security in this area, I look at the big changes of big international structural power changes and see whether they systematically influence the security situation in East Asia. I must say, in comparison, that they do. They seem to have influence directly in Europe. But when I look at, I looked at two different conflict databases, the Uppsala database and the Correlates of War database, and it seems quite clear that none of the big changes greatly affected East Asia's security situation. Even more surprisingly, it seems that the increase of American power, unlike in West Europe, where it clearly pacified a situation, here in East Asia, and here I'm talking about Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, both of them, it seemed that the influence was not systematic. It was just coincidental, or kind of it was varied, and also that it seems that